Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at quite the weekend that my friend Dakota and I had up here around the Jacksonville area, railfanning the many main lines, and actually all the way into southern Georgia as well. Now, for whatever reason, there'd be quite a lot of EMD motors running around this weekend, so that's what we'd focus on, as well as catching anything else that would come our way on this chilly Halloween weekend. It's Friday, October 31st, and on this brisk Halloween morning, we're heading out from Jacksonville, westbound on I-10 towards Baldwin. There would be no real goal at the current moment, but pulling into the south end of Baldwin Yard, we get our first glimpse of a weekend of EMDs up here, as L752 departs for Point South. This train will come as a surprise to some of you, as we know that L752 is a Sunday through Thursday train, rarely running on Fridays, yet seen today as a pickup in Stark would be needed for whatever reason, although we wouldn't follow. It would, however, be a very short day for 752, as they'd make that pickup down the line and switch the Lottie sand mine before returning to Baldwin just a couple hours later and helping the two yard jobs assemble and organize cuts in the yard for the remainder of the day. Baldwin would be slow this morning, as a handful of trains would come north up the S-line, some that we'll see later today, but for now we'd point our focus north towards Crawford, as we heard Norfolk Southern loud and clear on the radio.
I got CSX about to go by Duval, going into their yard. One of the UPS trains. I got stacked here behind Barrel.
Many are familiar with Crawford, where CSX's double-tracked Callahan sub to its namesake town crosses the NS main line into Jacksonville, the old GSNF, which is still what the radio calls this Valdosta district. Crawford is the north end of the siding on the NS, with Norris being the south end, and where we'd find ourselves as 64Q would arrive from the north, with a loaded train of ethanol for interchange with the Florida East Coast Railway. Hailing from Decatur, Alabama, these 64Q trains are as-needed runs, and one of the very few trains that this GSNF main line ever sees to Jacksonville that are made up of a bulk commodity, making quite the cool sight this morning. Only adding to the rarity of this train would be adding a second ethanol unit train to the scene, as 64Q would be in the hole here this frigid morning for his northbound counterpart, train 65Q. The 65Q is Decatur-bound empties from the FEC, and a train that I've actually never seen before. It's hard to guess northbound departures, especially on the all-too-quiet NS, but today we just get extremely lucky, as rarely do these ethanol trains even run often enough to meet somewhere around here. As the sun starts to brush the treetops with its golden morning light, 65Q would appear, rolling north at track speed with 98 empties bound for Decatur, led by SD70 Ace number 1087, and an ES44 trailing second.
Look good, got the marker light. There's 64Q.
64Q's crew would step out to inspect 65Q's consist, which would pass by without fault, upgrading the signal here at Norris to a diverging clear for 64Q, telling the crew that they're lined out of the siding towards Jax with clearance for full track speed once they're out on the main line. We'd skip around the corner to the next crossing south at Thomas Creek Road, as the 64Q departs from the siding, soon passing our post with a trio of thoroughbreds leading the charge. From here, it would be a quick drive south to the crossing at Acre Road, where the lighting, cold temps, and slight color change in the trees would really give us about as much autumn as we get here down in Florida. A beautiful scene nonetheless, as 64Q rumbles by. As you continue south towards the northwest suburbs of Jacksonville, you'll also near CSX and the A line, which up here always comes in a pair with Old Kings Road, the original highway that the British built to connect Florida with the rest of the colonies, and the route that Henry Plant would follow closely as the railroad would arrive into Jax. It would be our route this morning as we'd leapfrog the 64Q again at Birdville as the crew cruises into Simpson yard limits with orders to crawl in behind Job 60. That Job 60 would be this train, the morning yard switcher, using a rebuilt AC-44 C6M as power to shuffle intermodal cars around into the yard. Train 26J would be present here as well, after arriving just before that 65Q got out of here. Finally, 64Q would come up one of the many yard tracks and throw his switches in order to pull through the yard and towards the final 8 miles to the FEC across the St. John's. We'd bid farewell to 64Q and do some exploring around the CSX, taking our sweet time to find a spot around Moncrief as train I-196 departs. 196 is that northbound Jacksonville to Chicago overflow train, made up of I-26 traffic, today only about 3,000 feet of it, only requiring one motor for the job. We picked North Edgewood Avenue as our photo spot, as the lighting here wouldn't be as horrific as shots north of us, and the quiet dead end always makes for a good spot to relax, or in my case, study. The grind does not stop, folks. Meeting the I-196 up the line at Ratliff would be CO13, coal loads for Jacksonville at West Jax, hence its routing down this Nahunta sub towards us, peeling around the bend on track 1 just a few minutes after that 196 would clear.
535, 90535, 103125, 8633.6. CO for 1327, engine 928 AM Cobb, circle line 11. Line 11, do not exceed restricted speed. Do not exceed restricted speed. Between milepost A, 639.1, A 639.1, and milepost A, 640.3, A 640.3 on number 2 track. That's number 2 track. Due to previous train and emergency, if in a previous train and emergency, RLS.
CO13 is coal loads from the mine at Atkinson, Kentucky to Jacksonville and West Jax Yard. There, the mainline crew will give the train to a local crew out of Moncrief, who will take the train south down the A line to Botswick and Palatka and Seminole Electric's power plant there. It's an interesting service design, but they've been doing it for so long down here that it must work pretty well. Although Edgewood is a heavy industrial section of town, there's still plenty of good eats around here, one such being Monroe's Smokehouse and Barbecue, a spot just south of the SP line at West Jax and our lunch spot for the day. They're known for their smoked and fried wings, which did not disappoint, and along with their friendly and quick service, I know where I'll be coming back to the next time I'm in the neighborhood. With lunch now in the bag and successfully eaten, we'd find ourselves back at Baldwin as train M442 would be spotted, sitting crewless at the south end of the yard. This is the modern reality of Baldwin operations, as the train would arrive just after sunrise and sit here all the way till now, around 2 p.m. A lot of people think that trains switch in Baldwin for hours, but once you get here and see what's going on, it's really just a whole lot of waiting. We'd arrive as the Waycross crew would pull up, who'd still have about a half hour of switching to do before getting out of here, involving dropping a cut of manifest in the yard. But first, the crew would saddle up on their Canadian National SD70M-2, run through power from an ethanol train to Tampa, and apparently the preferred power set for this morning's manifest train.
Get to the north end of that west 5 and get them stopped there. You got to start at 107 and I'll get with you. All right. Just 30 feet, 30 feet.
With a very cool crew on board, we'd watch as 442 enters Baldwin, soon drifting north to 4 Acre, as the conductor would get a ride up there to the head end. A call to the dispatcher would be all it would take to get this train's signals to roll north, with a couple of jokes along the way.
Conductor on the head, ready to go, sitting at 4 Acre, over. Alright, you know that for 364 days out of the year, that engineer wears his mask when he doesn't need to, but today, it's his first and only day that he can wear it without being embarrassed, over. Hey man, you know why monsters don't eat ghosts? Well, I'm sure you'll tell me. They taste like sheep. Alright, come on north, signal indication. You're following 26 away at Callahan, over. I hope he's got a number 8 throttle, because here we come. He should be looking at you here in the next minute and a half, so, as I said, you'll follow him northbound, over. Thanks, sir. Certainly do appreciate it. Hey, did you know that witches aren't good at math, but they're pretty good at spelling?
442 would be ready to go on track 3, as you could hear, and would get going as that IO-26 would arrive from the west, hauling around on track 1 at track speed, just moments after 442's trio of engines had cleared, making for quite the sight as the two northbounds race each other towards Callahan. IO-26 would get going a bit quicker than 442, although he'd have a much shorter train and higher priority. 442 wasn't lying though when he talked about notching it up to Waycross, as the two trains would practically parallel each other, which would make it hard for us to get ahead. We would, eventually, although it would take us almost the entirety of the remaining 18 miles to Callahan to do so. Arriving to red signals, neither train would be lined north through here, as I-137 would have greens to go south. But once he'd clear, so would the signals, as the race between intermodal and freight resumes. 442 would notch it up here once more, as we'd head out and back on 301 northbound, in an attempt to intercept the train again. This wouldn't be a terribly easy task this afternoon, but knowing that 442 would eventually have to slow to let 26 get the main line first at Hague, we'd beat it to Folkestone, where the afternoon light would be much better, for another shot as 442 flies north. Final shot would come at South End Race Pond, where the Jessup sub bends to the northwest, and where a clearing in the pine forest would yield the best shot of the afternoon for our train of the day from home. As 442 would clear, so would the signal behind it, as I-143 would be in the vicinity now, calling signals and coming south towards us, showing up just before 6 p.m. now, amidst some beautiful evening light. I-143 is the current Fairburn to Jacksonville intermodal, with its counterpart now being I-144, a very early morning train out of Jax. Fairburn is just south of Atlanta city limits, where CSX hosts their ramp and facilities for the metropolis, obviously a very busy place by the looks of it, with 143 storming south with almost 2 miles of train tonight. From Race Pond, we drive back to Folkestone, where the lighting would be better for our last few trains of the evening. It was Halloween after all, with dinner and candy still needing to be obtained this chilly evening. We'd wait out a couple moves though, as there wasn't much waiting to be done, with Amtrak 52, the northbound auto train, coming into view momentarily. Four minutes pass, and coming from Waycross would be L795, with a quartet of engines, albeit GE, leading what locals call the Moncrief Monster to Jacksonville. Last train of the night would come just 20 minutes later, as M452 is lined through, making the trip from Baldwin to Waycross tonight, a nightly occurrence around here for a train we're used to seeing in broad daylight. This would wrap up our night trackside, but we'd be back out early the next morning along the S line as the parade of EMDs would begin. From campus, Baldwin isn't a terribly far commute, especially enjoyable this morning with temps in the low 50s, a cloudless sky, and clear roads from I-95 to I-10. This morning, we're going after an M441, who'd be all crewed up and ready to get going from Baldwin with a duo of flared SD70 Max leading. Quite the lash-up for this Tampa-bound train that doesn't even run in daylight half the time anymore. Coming into Baldwin, we hear 441 getting a job briefing with signals to pull from where he stood. So we'd book it south to Maxville, where we get our first glimpse of this morning's novelty, meeting his northbound counterpart just south of the yard. Maxville and its overpass would make for a swell first shot, as we'd head out with the head end in order to beat the train to Lottie. The light would be favorable here, as our train rolls south with a clear main line. Lottie would be all quiet today, save for US 301, which feels like nowadays is almost always infested with semi-trucks or sedan drivers apparently experiencing their first day on Earth. It wouldn't matter to us, however, as 441 continues to notch up his train, prepared to cross onto the single main line at Noonan, at the south end of this double track through Stark. Next stop would be Waldo, where we'd get ahead of the train by a solid 2 minutes, battling the Jacksonville-bound traffic from Gainesville, as today would be the Georgia-Florida game at Everbank, a contest that has people from all over the state driving to go see. South of Orange Heights, the S-Line really starts to parallel 301 favorably, as the tracks cross under at Waldo onto the sunlit side, which would work out for our case today, as 441 cruises south without a care in the world. We'd break off the pace as Dakota wanted to try a shot at the curve at Lochloosa, a wide sweeping variant that this morning would guide the head end into morning light that simply does not get much better than this. Last shot of the pursuit would come at Citra as 441 barrels through town, passing the old orange store closely, which would actually be open this day. In all my times driving by here, never once have I actually seen this store open, so we'd take the opportunity that was given to us and stop in for a treat. The place isn't huge, but it's super quaint and well kept, and sells what I'd say is likely the best orange juice I've ever tasted, squeezed from citrus grown right down the road. When author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings first wrote about the Cross Creek and Citra areas in the early 20th century, this is what I'd imagine she'd be writing about. Juice so sweet, so fresh and local that it made the rural swamp life here well worth it. To Baldwin we'd go once more, working our way back north towards Waycross now, with a stop at the Diamond as M453 arrives from the north. Today he'd have orders to pull into the yard and cut his train into 3 sections, the third and last portion being behind the DPU in the shape of a loaded Herzog ballast train, one that can be destined for anywhere between here, Tampa, Lakeland, Orlando, or even Miami. It's maintenance season down here now, so I expect to see these cuts like this more and more often. Later in the day, we'd grab lunch in Hilliard, where we'd set up nicely for another I-143 rolling south, who'd be meeting another Jacksonville intermodal right in front of us, calling us I-032. North from Hilliard, we'd have time to make it up to Waycross at the Satilla River, as M541 would be approaching, with another Mac duo leading this one. A third Mac would be in the consist as well as the mid-train DPU, so we'd make the drive up here for that, setting up quickly on this southern section of the Fitzgerald sub as he'd approach. .541 would slow down enough to allow us to get ahead of him by the time he was rounding the final curve into Waycross. All would seem to be working out until a horn from the south would catch us by surprise and play blocker for the second time today as M544 emerges with another Mac in the consist, meeting the tail end of that 541 at Jamestown. So that's where we'd go, as 544 would navigate the steep hills of the area, rapidly approaching our post with that trio of motors and a solid train of freight from Rice Yard to Cincinnati. After 544, we'd stick around Jamestown, just north of the control point, actually along some pecan orchards that follow the tracks around here. We'd be out taking pictures when a signal call out and a distant horde would make us set up as L738 approaches. This is one of the Fitzgerald locals running back to his terminal this afternoon with Dash 9 number 9051 up front. we'd be pleasantly surprised by the power today, as rumors have it that many of these Dash 8 and Dash 9 motors are on the chopping block fairly soon, evidently returned to service recently to live out their final few months for the railroad. Who knows, maybe they'll last another 5 years, but for now, 738 would be a lovely addition to our already eventful day. Well, as I've probably mentioned by now, we have moved south out of Waycross along this Jessup sub towards Folkestone at Swamp Park Road. It's just here north of Braganza, and that was IO-26 heading north. He's a little bit later today, and he's going to be meeting an M441 at South Waycross who's ready to come south towards Baldwin. Now, 441 has yet another Mac leader. So I guess this year CSX decided to dress up as an interesting railroad. So here we wait for him and probably chase him south and see what else we can get along the way. 441 would move down to Astoria as 26 would clear, although he'd still have to wait on one more train, this one calling as M452 out of Miami, with another Mac trailing, led by CSX 43, an original 90s era AC 44, with some ditch lights that I guess are pretty in sync with each other. Either way, pretty cool sight you just don't see every day. Our evening light would slowly be forsaking us as M441 finally gets signals to depart, with another flared Mac leading the way, one that we'd catch here just north of Braganza and follow south a ways, as CO41 would be following on approaches, both destined for Baldwin, where both crews' days will end. At South End Braganza, we'd beat the train again, not in any particular hurry this night, which when paired with the clear US 23, made for an easy windows down chase this cold evening. Finally, to South End Race Pond we go once again, as 441 continues to knock down clear signals, with the Race Pond detector just south of us expecting his arrival. 441 would roll by, which would let the signal here upgrade to a restricting, and then an approach, next to an approach medium, and finally, as CO41 would appear, a high green. Here's some more coal, this one going to Orlando now, with a train full of energy that'll keep some people's homes cool and others warm. CO41 would slow down as M441 would develop some type of issue that would alter his course a bit and slow him to a stop. The problem would be resolved fairly quickly as it had something to do with the train's automatic braking of some sort, yet we'd still beat the head end to Callahan, where we'd set up one last time for our third Mac leader of the day. Pretty good if you ask me. From Callahan, we'd make our way back, as tomorrow we'd sleep in a bit before heading back out to see what else we could find. We'd meander around downtown for a bit before heading back to the S-Line at Crawford, as a fleet of trains would be approaching this afternoon. This Sunday would also mark the first day of daylight savings, which explains the 5 p.m. sunset today, as the S-Line afternoon rush begins with IO26, powered by a few different motors, including another EMD second out. And just like Friday, M442 would be coming up alongside the IO26 with that pair of SD70s we chased yesterday, now leading an ES40 back to Waycross after making the round trip to Tampa. Waiting on both the IO26 and M442 at Callahan would be L743, who'd get signals to head to Baldwin once both would clear, appearing just a few minutes after the 442. While his power set is certainly not the most interesting we've seen, it's nice to see CSX actually powering up some of their trains out here, in place of the many 1x1 DPU power sets we see much too often. "15 minutes pass and B619 calls it clear at the interlocking. More ethanol for Tampa, run by another trio of motors with ethanol from Chicago. 14 minutes later, and the parade continues as M603 comes around the bend at Callahan with a trainload of merchandise for Lakeland, with YN2 AC44 in charge, passing by in golden evening light that occurs now at a ripe 5:04 p.m. Waiting at Briceville would be our final train of the weekend, coming in the form of M452 out of Baldwin. One last Mac would trail on this beast, wrapping up quite the weekend out and about in the area, and one that I hope you've all enjoyed seeing. At Crawford, we'd call it, but trust me, there's so much more to come, between another trip coming up here on the horizon and a couple of full-length documentaries that are currently in the works. I'm excited to start publishing them for you guys, and I hope you all stick around to see them. But until we meet again somewhere out there trackside, this is Christian from Multicolor Films, end of transmission.